town halls and public events like this are really going to be the centerpiece of this campaign. We've been on this track from the beginning. There are a couple reasons why. One, of course, is to distinguish ourselves from who we were first running against, which was Lou Barletta. Lou hasn't done a public town hall since 2011. My campaign treasurer insisted that we keep track. The number guy, of course, wants to keep track. So we had to put up a public town hall count for him. This is the 4th event we've had. We're going to be doing dozens and dozens more. We're doing this for a simple reason. If a representative does not visit with you, does not talk with you, and does not listen to you, that is not your representative. Our goal is to represent you appropriately. For sure, Lou Barletta sits in the Congress. Who he's representing, it can't be you. He doesn't talk to you. All right. So yesterday, actually, let me back up a little farther in time. August 11th, I was here in Plymouth. Everybody knows why I was here on August 11th. It's kielbasi time, folks. So Scott was kind enough to introduce me to a number of members of the Plymouth Borough Council. I asked the president of the Borough Council if the population of Plymouth is increasing or decreasing. And he told me, of course, that the population is decreasing. The reason I asked that question is because there's a very, very direct relationship between the economic health of a community and their population. If your population is decreasing in size, your community is having problems economically, almost assuredly. If it's increasing, you're overcoming economic problems. And that includes not just business and jobs, but also revenue for your government and for your schools. Okay. And sure enough, yesterday, I was here in town to attend a Borough Council working session where they talked about the trade-off between turning down or closing a firehouse and hiring more police. And I'll tell you, that is a painful decision to make. Am I right, Frank? It's a very painful decision to make. Nobody in the room was happy. No one in that room was happy. It didn't matter which side of the issue you were on. Even if you felt like the Borough Council indicated they were going to make the decision that you were in favor of, nobody was happy with that. So it's appropriate, I think, that we're going to be talking about economic issues tonight. I know all of you came with the expectation that please give me an economic PowerPoint presentation, and I'm not going to disappoint you. We're absolutely going to do that. We're going to talk about strong communities, strong nation. It's based on a simple premise. We know, all of us know, that the national economy has recovered from the Great Recession. But that's an aggregate. That's an average. We also know that communities like Plymouth and elsewhere throughout the 11th District and across Pennsylvania and all around the nation have been left behind. They haven't recovered, or they're trending in the wrong direction. So it's time now at the national level to shift our focus from what we do as a nation to what we're doing in our communities and point national policies towards lifting communities. We know, we've seen it now, if we lift the nation up, we can let communities slip through our fingers. If we're getting our hands underneath communities and lifting them up, we're going to lift the whole nation. To do that, we have to understand some basic economic principles, and first and foremost among them is supply and demand. How many of you think you know the relationship between supply and demand? Everybody knows, right? Everybody knows this. Almost everybody knows this. You're laughing, and that's appropriate. I laugh. July 7th is my birthday. I got to read this quote on July 7th. I almost sent Rick Perry a thank you note for this. This is what drives the economic philosophy of a number of people in the Republican Party. Rick Perry's wrong, of course, right? I wish he was right. We all wish he was right, because we would all be hugely successful business people if Scott Perry was right. We would open a business, the demand would rush in, we'd be a success, we'd be tap dancing our way into retirement. But that's not how it works. That's really more of a description of why businesses fail. People open a business, they offer goods or services, the demand does not show up, and they run out of fiscal room, and then they go bankrupt or they close their doors. That's a very typical outcome. Because Rick Perry's wrong. Demand does not follow supply. Supply follows demand. And I'm going to give you a couple examples of that so we can foot stomp that point, because I want you to use this information later. So well, that's a picture of my dogs. Well, okay, since we're here, let me give you my extremely truncated history of wolf domestication and dog evolution. It'll take a moment. 15,000 years ago, perhaps as much as 30,000 years ago, some fool in a cave decided to pet a wolf. And now, today, we're all stuck doing it. These things are relentless, right? These are the ultimate examples of demand, right? And so what do we have? You're buying dog food and dog treats and dog toys, collars, flea collars, harnesses, leashes. My dogs went out yesterday morning wearing sweaters. My friend has dogs going out wearing boots. Pet Value, Petco, PetSmart, Vet Bills, Vet Bill, Vet Bill. You can have a doggy sitter. You can have a doggy walker come over to your house. You can take them to doggy daycare, to a hotel, to a spa. You can have someone massage your dog, which is great because after all, that's that petting thing that we've been stuck with. Or you can actually have a psychiatrist come out and evaluate your dog. Does anybody have an idea how much Americans spend each year taking care of their pets? How big that demand is? Anybody want to offer a guess? Gavin? $2 billion. $2 billion? That's 25 billion. Not bad guesses. Anybody want to go higher?
30 billion.
30 billion. Nice. You're all quite short. This is in billions. I use this chart because I couldn't find a chart that ran all the way through 2017. I'll tell you the estimate for 2017 is Americans are going to spend $70 billion this year on their pets. $70 billion. That's demand that's driving this industry. And let's highlight something here. Everybody remembers the Great Recession, right? We started talking about the Great Recession. That was right here. Demand did not drop off for pet supplies and pet services during this period. This is relentless demand. This is supply following demand. That's how this works. Not what Rick Perry says. It isn't demand follows supply. Supply follows demand. Now, if you run into Rick Perry and he insists that no, demand follows supply, challenge him to produce and sell these things. And then I think you'll press the point. There's no demand for this anymore. You can make them until the cows come home. The demand will not follow that supply. That's not how any of this works. So what we have to do, if we're going to support local communities, is we have to generate local demand. Local demand attracts business. Businesses provide jobs. If you have a community where local demand is growing continuously, more business, and businesses respond to more demand with more hiring. Okay? That's what we're going after. Government has a few triggers that we can use to help support that. And that's what I'm running for Congress. You want to know what I'm going to do in Congress to help? Here are the triggers that we can pull to help your local communities. Now, these aren't equally effective. The Republicans right now, with their tax plan, are focusing on that little yellow section there. And let's say, for example, our goal was increased growth by 2%. We measure economic activity as gross domestic product, right? That's economic activity, that's dollars changing hands, right? Not dollars sitting in a pile somewheres. We're not talking about wealth, we're talking about dollars changing hands. So they want to work on business investment. They would have to get 2% growth out of business investment, they would have to increase business spending by 12%. You know, Gary Cohn sat in a room full of CEOs and he said, how many of you are going to reinvest these huge tax breaks we're going to give you? And only a handful of hands went up. Most of the people are not going to do that. That's not an effective lever. The most effective is personal consumption. That's demand. And let's define demand real quick. That doesn't mean that you have a need or a want. That means you have a need or a want and you have the money to satisfy it. That's demand. If you have no money, it doesn't matter that you have needs or wants. We're not going anywhere with that. If we increase consumer spending, consumer demand by just 3%, we would have that 2% growth. The green section is government spending. And to get 2% growth out of government spending, and that's federal, state, and local level spending, then we would need about 13% increase. And just take it from me, take it on faith if you can, governments know how to spend money. Trust me on that. This is just a tiny partial list of the things that governments can do at the municipal and at the personal level to increase demand. Every one of these programs has the same effect of pushing money into your communities to help increase demand so you attract business and create jobs. Okay? It doesn't matter which program brings money into your community. It doesn't matter who brings money into your community, whether it's a retiree, whether it's someone on disability, whether it's a resettled refugee. If they are bringing a dollar into your community, they are helping generate demand, attracting business, and creating jobs. If you want to keep any of these dollars out of your community, you're stifling demand. We'll talk a couple examples here. First, let's talk about government spending. You've heard Democrats and Republicans both say that if they spend money on infrastructure, we're going to get jobs. They're 100% correct. That's a gross simplification of what really goes on, but they're absolutely right. If Donald Trump ever gets around to that $1 trillion infrastructure plan that we still haven't seen 11 months in, and starts sending that money out to the states and out to the municipalities, those government levels are going to start contracting environmental studies and engineering studies. They're going to start hiring contractors to build roads, bridges, community parks, so on and so forth. And that increase in demand will cause those companies to hire more people, and we will have more jobs, and we'll have an upward spiral of economic growth. The same exact thing is true with the other three things listed below that. The steps are almost identical. Government grants going out to state and municipal governments, hiring for surveys, hiring for contractors, et cetera, to provide whatever the local communities need. But there are a couple distinctions here that are quite important. One, of course, we don't have the infrastructure plan from the administration that he's promised us. But as part of that, you don't know exactly where that infrastructure money is going to be spent. The state, for example, if it got a grant, might spend things on the eastern part of the state and the western part of the state and leave the T completely vacant. The nearest project might be 100 miles to the east, 200 miles to the west. We miss out. The Chesapeake Bay restoration, of course, involves the Susquehanna Valley, which is kind of important to all of us here. That money is spent right here. The Appalachian Regional Commission exists to help former coal towns up and down the Appalachians. There are a lot of programs there that bring money in here. And of course, community development block grants will help any community anywhere in the country. All three of those programs were zeroed out by Donald Trump in his first budget proposal to Congress. There are people working in the 11th Congressional District today in jobs that are funded by those programs. Those jobs will go away if that money goes away. We need money in all of those areas to support growth. Let's talk about your wallet. And I expect one or two of you to reach around and see if you've got your wallet with you here. Let's start with payroll taxes. Every employee in the U.S. pays 6.2% of their pay in payroll taxes. This is how we pay for Social Security, right? Everyone, that is, who makes up to $127,200. After that, you pay nothing more. That's it. So no employee in the United States pays more than $7,886.40 in payroll taxes, period. Everybody wave hi at Mark Wahlberg. Mark he led All Actors in Hollywood last year with $68 million. Mark Wahlberg pays $7,886.40 in payroll taxes. So while you're paying 6.2%, he's paying 0.0116%. I rounded this up a bit. It's really 0.011573 or something like that. You pay 6.2, he pays that. That might not seem fair to you. It might make you a little bit angry. I can make you even angrier. A person who makes $174,000 a year pays only 4.53% payroll taxes while you're paying 6.2. Why would that make you more angry? Every sitting member of Congress in the Senate and the House makes $74,000 a year. They pay 4.53. You pay 6.2. Is that fair? No, I don't think so. We can fix this. It's simple. First, step one, you eliminate the cap. Mark Wahlberg's payroll tax is going to zoom up to $4 million. Instead of paying a quarter or a third of, contributing a quarter of a third of the cost of a single retiree, Mark Wahlberg alone would cover about 133 retirees. You're saying, well, that would fix the funding problem with Social Security, and you're absolutely right. In fact, it would over-fix the problem, and so we'd be able to lower the rate for everyone. Let's say, for sake of argument, that we change the rate from 6.2 to 5%. For a family making $50,000 a year, that's the difference between $3,100 a year in payroll taxes and $2,500 a year in payroll taxes. That's $600 they can spend in their local community. That matters. We just lost 2 pizza restaurants here in Plymouth. They might still be open if everybody had $600 they could spend each year. Better than that, if we lower your rate from 6.2 to 5, and everybody's rate is 5, then we're raising the rate on members of Congress from 4.53 to 5. And I will posit this. If we're lowering your taxes at the same time we're raising taxes on members of Congress, we're doing exactly the right thing. Anybody familiar with the current income tax debate? Are you following that at all?
Yeah.
Who's happy? Raise your hand if you're happy. All we're waiting to learn now is what the final amount of damage is going to be to us, right? That's where we're at. So because they haven't finalized their numbers, I'm not going to talk about the Republican plan. I'm going to talk about the current status, and then you'll be able to reference that when you look at and see what they're doing. There are really 3 things I want you to focus on in this chart. This is married filing jointly current tax brackets. Now, the first thing that has to be pointed out, you hear people say, well, wealthy people pay 39.6% of their income in taxes, and folks farther down the scale pay only 10%, and that's not true. Wealthy people pay the same amount on that amount of income right there that you do. You pay 10%, they pay 10%, period. And that's true for every one of those brackets. They don't get to 39.6 until they clear $470,000. So that's the first thing I want you to notice. The second thing I want you to notice is look how steep this climb is here in the lower income ranges. 10%, 5%, 10%, and then suddenly the steps get smaller and smaller and smaller as you get higher and higher in your earned income. And then third, the brackets stop at $470,000. Mark Wahlberg doesn't sustain another tax increase at $1 million or $2 million or $5 million or $10 million. 39.6 from $470,701 all the way through $68 million. Never pays any more than that. This is what it looks like in practical terms. The red line represents the tax brackets. The blue line is what you actually experience when you're paying taxes. And you'll notice that on the left of the screen, where we're talking about people in the working class, people in the middle class, people striving to get through middle class, maybe to upper middle class, that climb is steep. But once you're making $500,000, whether you make another $2 million or $10 million or $50 million, there's no further increase. It just stays flat. And I will tell you notionally that Republicans are talking about, at least in one plan, going from 10% to 12, and from 39.6 down to 38.5. That doesn't help you. It helps those folks who are already quite well taken care of. That line should be straight. That climb, that slope should be the same for everybody, and it's easy enough to do. We smooth out the brackets so the slope is flatter for low to middle income earners, and then we add brackets for people who make $1 million, $2 million, $5 million, $10 million. So Mark Wahlberg does experience progressive tax increases as he makes $68 million or $75 million or whatever he's going to make over the next year. We can do this and pay for what we need from the federal government while you have more money in your pocket. I see this scene everywhere I travel up and down the 11th District, from Shippensburg up into Tunkhannock and all points in between. Of course, we see it here in Plymouth. I can't tell you that every one of those storefronts that we see is empty from lack of local demand. There are other things that affect people's decisions to close their business, but I'll tell you this. We can't fill those empty storefronts unless we generate local demand. That means more money for you, more money for your local communities, so you can attract business and create jobs. Plymouth is important, these communities are important, This is how we're going to make the nation grow. And with that, the fun part, your questions. Thanks. And if you don't want to ask me an economic question, that's totally fine too. Yes, sir.
How do you think internet transactions are affecting local demand?
It has an effect, of course. Of course. And that's if you can buy from Amazon, or you can buy from Cabela's online, or even Walmart, of course, has the Walmart effect is a known thing. It's named after Walmart, of course. They do pull business out of downtown areas, absolutely. And that did close some of those places. But again, the key to getting those open again and getting businesses in them is an increase in demand. Let me give you a couple examples. I live now in Carlisle, which is the county seat for Cumberland County. It's the fastest growing county in Pennsylvania. There are new businesses popping up all over Carlisle, all over. In fact, in one intersection between Noble Ave and South Hanover, there is a Five Guys, there is a Firehouse Subs, and a Chick-fil-A that opened in April, May, and August of this year. You can stand at any one of them and hit the other two with a stone. Dallas just opened 3 new businesses. Dallas has a growing population. Small businesses in the center of town. The same thing can happen here, but the opposite is happening, right? We have a continually declining population here, and so again, 2 pizza restaurants most recently, and the Borough Council is struggling with getting enough revenue to provide fire protection and police protection that everybody needs here. It's an issue. We have to deal with it, but the solution is more money for you and more money for your community to deal with blight issues and quality of life issues and things that not only generate jobs as you're doing those things, but they attract more members into the community as well.
On the subject of taxes, like you were talking about federal income tax.
Sure.
And decreases in grants to local governments, because you cut taxes at the federal level, that means there's less money for grants to state and local governments and that sort of thing. And how does that affect your local tax?
Well, if you want to keep paying for things, then you're going to raise your local taxes. Otherwise, you're going to do without services. And that's, Republicans talk endlessly, right? We're going to cut federal spending by 5% or 10%. Those cuts translate into a 1% and 2% decrease in GDP growth. We have to make that up somehow, some way. And of course, again, the grants that mean a loss of services in your local communities make it impossible to keep your population in here as well. So it's huge. I'm sorry, I'll get to you in just a minute, Joe. We've watched the federal government and the state government provide less and less and less support for high schools and for high school and below, right? Public schools. And that puts the burden on the local communities. And that's okay for some local communities because they're wealthy. And for other local communities, it's an absolute disaster. It's a problem at the college level as well. While I was going to school at George Mason University in Virginia, I watched the cost of tuition go up and up and up. I was protected from that because I was there under the GI Bill, and I got paid to go to school. So it was a wonderful experience for me. But for everyone else around me, they watched their tuition go up and up and up as the state provided less and less and less money to support that university. Public tuition goes up, and that releases private universities to charge more as well, because they don't have the group they're competing with is raising their prices, and so up goes theirs. And what do you end up with? Student loans that are becoming the most consequential debt that we have here in the nation.
Hey, I live out in Dallas, and probably 75% of the people out there are Republicans. Mm-hmm. And I hear a lot of things, but one of the things I hear, they're Republicans because the Republicans expect everybody to make a living on their own, and they don't have to depend on entitlements. So how do you answer this question if you were asked this kind of question by a Republican who, is just assuming since you're a Democrat, you're just in favor of all kinds of entitlements?
Well, we want to turn those people, both Republicans and Democrats, right, want to turn people who need help into productive citizens, tax-paying citizens, right? That's the goal we're going after, right? So what the Republicans are expecting is that they're going to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and do that. The reality here in this country is everybody, just about everyone, dies in the same economic strata that they were born into. That's the reality. And so if you want to move people out of poverty or working class or lower middle class and move them up the ladder, you've got to provide for them opportunities that are available to people who are already in that economic strata. And if you deny those opportunities to them, we're going to get the same outcomes that we've had, which is born poor, die poor. Born working class, die working class. You just don't move up. It's just so rare for people to move up. The economic mobility used to be a wonderful thing in this country, but it is not what it used to be. And of course, it was kind of a myth in the past as well. But yeah, if you want someone who comes from a broken home, who had to drop out of high school and can't go to college to earn what somebody in college or someone who's graduated from college makes, you've got to close that gap. We have that problem right now with, and I'll get to you in just a minute. With public education, we had a pretty good deal for quite a long period of time during the 20th century in that we provided free education right through high school. And it used to be people who graduated from high school could reach the middle class coming out of that. There's a gap now. You don't graduate high school and go find a job or a career that's going to move you into the middle class. The return we're getting on investment for education, therefore, is not there because they're not going on and providing those taxes back that we want. So we need to increase our investment so we can get that return. Now, I'm not going to tell you that means 4 free years of college, but it might mean 2, or it might mean vocational schools, or it might be some mix of those things. But when we're not getting a return on that investment, our option, you could just stop, which would be completely foolhardy, or you close that gap so you start getting that return again. And that seems like the more sensible approach to me. Yes, sir.
For the gentleman from Dallas, these people that ask you about entitlements, ask them how many of them turned down their Social Security check or their Medicare or any of that. They are also entitled.
Unemployment checks.
Unemployment. They take all those entitlements. And I can guarantee you the ones that are making $1 million a year take that Social Security check when it comes into money.
And again, we don't want to demonize these programs because every dollar that comes into your community is helping you generate demand. And if they want to shut those dollars off, they're stifling demand in their community. And they might be in an upward spiral now, but that's not guaranteed. You can close those programs off and start seeing things go downhill. I like to talk about SNAP. People complain all the time about the food stamps and how many people are getting food stamps. SNAP doesn't become money until it gets to your local grocery store. Now, you can cut SNAP off, and that means those people won't be fed, and they'll find alternatives to getting fed. But it also means you're cutting off money to your local grocery store. And that might be enough for that grocery store to go out of business. So now, for a period of time, you're probably paying higher prices. But when they close, now you're going to drive 5, 10, in rural Pennsylvania, 20 miles to go get groceries. And that's driving your costs up. Now, everybody likes to think that their personal taxes are paying for that person over there. We need to change the taxes, so that Mark Wahlberg pays more, and we pay, people like folks in this room pay less. Sir.
Yeah, another economic question.
I'm ready for it.
What do you say to the argument that, gee, don't you feel like hardworking Americans deserve to have more of their money left in their pockets?
I do. And that's why I want to cut that cap on payroll taxes so that we can bring that percentage down. That's why I want to adjust those brackets on income, not the direction the Republicans are doing, which favors the wealthy, but the opposite direction that favors the working class and middle class and get more money out of Mark Wahlberg. I keep saying Mark Wahlberg because someday he's going to hear about this and he's going to show up at one of these events, and well, that's going to be a hoot.
Can I follow up on that just a minute?
Please.
I think from my perspective, I hear that argument. My position on it is that that's an argument by definition. When they say hardworking Americans, they're not talking about hardworking Americans. Right. They're talking about people who make their money off of hardworking Americans.
Yeah.
Now,
sure.
I don't have anything wrong with enterprise. I think it's wonderful. American enterprise has done great things over the centuries. But when it becomes so greedy that the people at the top need to squeeze every, squeeze the, what do they call?
The
Squeeze
nickels
whatever off
until
the
George
Buffalo
Washington
nickel.
cries.
That's what they're talking about. They're not talking about the real hardworking Americans. And the fact of the matter is, we have to have taxes to pay the bills.
Yes.
And the question is, who should pay the taxes?
Perfectly correct.
So that's just an argument.
And so why should, for example, your dividends on your huge stock holdings be taxed at a lower rate than the hard work that people in this room are doing? It's never made any sense to me at all that labor is taxed at a higher rate than investment, that someone's trust fund is getting. I mean, God. Or inheritance. And of course, the Republicans want to get rid of the estate tax entirely. Why? Somebody tell me why Ivanka Trump should get hundreds of millions of dollars tax-free when you've got to work for every dollar that you get and are taxed on every one of them. Go ahead, Wendy.
All right, so JP Morgan Chase recently did a study that showed small business is better for economic growth and jobs for local communities. So would you be open to pushing something similar to a KOZ program for small boroughs like this to encourage small business owners to open up the new storefronts? There used to be a program called the CRIS that picked 2 cities a year from the state, but they cut that out of the budget this year. Wilkes-Barre happened to be one of them, but now they're no longer receiving funding. But instead of putting so much money into big box stores, would you consider fighting for small business growth within the community?
Fighting for small business growth, absolutely. But KOZ, of course, was a state-level program, and
They do still have the Small Business Association that helps out, but the idea is so the KOZ gives tax breaks. The CRIS program kind of did the same thing. So, but they only allowed it to 2 cities a year. Wilkes-Barre had it, but now it's been cut from the state as one of their budget cuts. So would you encourage something like that?
send me some information on that, and let me take a look at it.
Yeah.
We need support for local businesses, absolutely, and for small businesses. The challenge we have, some of the small businesses aren't so small, and they are better at gaming systems like that than a legitimate business like yours, for example.
Well, I just
So,
feel that like companies such as, and don't get me wrong, they're great companies, they brought jobs to the area. However, like bigger companies such as Chew or Amazon may not need the tax break as fully as maybe a small business that wants to open up, and it would help these guys fund different programs in their area if they had that subsidy from the state helping them with the tax.
it's a state issue, but KOZ seems to be something of a disaster from like Hazelton's experience and others, because sounds great, we're going to get jobs, but in the end you end up with less money than you would have had otherwise. Yes, sir.
Why is it that Congress has to wait for an infrastructure plan from the executive branch?
They don't. They could write their own. They could write, in fact, Lou Barletta sits on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. And that committee could be generating plans. And Frank, I'll tell you, one of the frustrations I have with the Democratic Party right now is that we're talking just about the Republican tax plan. And we're talking just about the Republican health care plan in the spring. And I would like to see a little more competition from the Democratic side of generating national plans to compete and show an alternative to what the Republicans are doing. There's no good reason why they're not doing that. It's a challenge, and I know people don't want to put their names against a program, but honestly, you need to show some alternatives beyond just how we're doing things today and how they propose doing things. Otherwise, you end up being just the party that resists, and that's not a good fit for us. We're the party that does things. We could have a House or Senate-sponsored transportation plan. The reason why it typically comes from the federal government is because they have the resources to do that. That's their job, right? We have a Department of Transportation secretary who should be cranking things like that out for us. But then we have a Department of the Treasury that should have given us an evaluation of the Republican tax plan. They've been telling us all year long that they're going to do that, and we learned today, not only did they not do it, they released a 1-page embarrassment of an evaluation of what the Republican tax plan is going to do for people. So, and Congress should be providing oversight and demanding that these things get done, but the administration has a very friendly team in Congress right now.
I am sure you know that Pennsylvania is one of the worst gerrymandered states in the country. And I'm sure you know that the 11th district is also gerrymandered.
I'm familiar.
How do you plan to overcome that obstacle?
In the campaign, you mean, or?
Yeah.
Okay. The 11th district is what it is right now. There is the tiniest sliver of a chance that the 11th district will be reorganized before the 2018 election. I think, frankly, that that's really not going to happen because the Supreme Court in Pennsylvania has given the Commonwealth Court until December 31st to render a ruling. Petition signing starts February 13th. That's a preciously small window to reorganize the state. I think more likely to be 2020. So in practical terms, what I'm doing is I'm driving up and down the district relentlessly. I'm fully retired. I can do events like this any time of the day, anywhere in the district. I've only had to overnight one time. I did Columbia County Democrat dinner on a Friday and Wyoming County Democrat brunch the next morning, so I stayed up in Bloomsburg, but otherwise I'm driving back and forth. This is my third day here, third day in a row here in this area. I was just across the river on Saturday, and then here yesterday, and here again today. I've got a fuel-efficient car, and I will drive the miles to come out and talk to people because that's what a representative is supposed to do, to be out here, talk with you, listen to you, make sure I know what your concerns are so I can take them back down to Washington.
But
Mr.
you
Dick?
have to drive hundreds of miles a day to do that.
Well,
But that's controlled
I shouldn't
by
have
the
to
state.
in this state.
But it is controlled
Right.
by the state, not by the federal government.
There are also federal level court cases that might make that change as well. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. If we lived in Wyoming, right, there's one congressman. If we lived in Alaska, there's one congressman. That's a whole lot of territory there. So I try to remind myself of things like that as I'm driving up and down I-81, while I also remind myself that rough, horrible road runs past Hazleton, where a member of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee lives. Mr. Dixon.
I know you're driving up and down the valley and everything, but wouldn't you cut to the chase a little bit if you contacted the local Democratic Party of Luzerne County? Udicek, Senator Udicek, Jerry Mullery, our representative here in Nanticoke.
Gail Conrad was invited, she said she was going to be here.
Okay, because, I mean, when you start doing things like that, I mean, that would make your job a lot easier because, you know, it's, to be honest, in this area, our voting percentage is down.
Yeah.
Luzerne County, you're getting like 30 percentile now. And you know, like, you have to energize everybody again.
Right.
I mean, enough is enough.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And I just think the Democrats hurt themselves years ago. And that's why we got in the position we are today. And we wound up with guys like Lou Barletta, etc.
Yep.
You know what I mean? You're a fresh face. And really, I wish you all the luck in the world. But you still need these other people. You have to.
Yep. And I'll tell you, I communicated with, there are 9 counties in the 11th district. I communicated with the Democratic committees of all 9. I didn't get responses from all 9, but I communicated with all 9. I've been to all of them. I was in Jim Thorpe recently, so I made sure I closed the loop there as well. I've been to Wyoming County 5 or 6 times at this point. I don't know how many times I've been in Luzerne County now. It's way beyond what I can count. I've been to every county in the district many times repeatedly. I'm conscious of where the votes are, et cetera, and we're recruiting continuously, both with committees, but also with unions and with universities and with indivisible groups and so on. And Andy, if you'd be kind enough, I would like you to stand up and introduce yourself to the group and talk about your role here in Northeast Pennsylvania.
Hi, I'm Andy Wilczak. I work at Wilkes University. I'm in charge of helping organize the campaign in the northern part of the district. So if anybody's looking to volunteer, we are very eager to take on anybody that's willing to help out. Finding places to hold events, any kind of new get out the vote ideas, brutally at a point where there's no such thing as a bad idea. I will listen to any idea that anybody has passed along. But to try to alleviate some of your concerns about how many miles Alan's putting on his car going up and down 81, the idea is to kind of have committees throughout the district to organize and make sure that candidates' time is as well spent as possible. So.
But I'll do this as a full-time job. I mean, I'll just keep doing this as long as it takes. And Andy just started in that role, so watch for a lot more coming from that. I'm going to have one more, before I get to you, Peter, one more person stand up and introduce himself, and it's Dr. John Boscia in the back there.
How you doing? I'm the treasurer for the campaign, and forgive me for being late. I was working until 6 o'clock in Camp Hill, which is across the river from Harrisburg. Flew up 81, and here we are.
So John's a volunteer like all of us. He's originally from the 570, as he likes to point out. John, do you have the reader with you?
I do.
And John has a card reader with him as well, so everybody who wants to make a donation can be satisfied by John this evening. So we'll get to that. Peter and then Frank. I'm sorry.
Earlier, Ronnie brought up Senator Toomey and Lou Barletta's name, and it's been thrown out here too as people who don't respond to their constituents. When we look back at the campaign, the Toomey campaign, it was the most expensive Senate campaign in the history of the country. Better than half of that money, either on the Democratic side or the Republican side, more than half of that campaign money came in from out of state. So we can make a case that somebody in Kansas is getting better representation in the Senate than we are.
Yep.
How will you approach campaign finance reform if you're elected?
Who's a fan of Citizens United here? Anybody? Yeah. Thanks, Wendy. Made my heart stop for a minute. We have to get the big money out first, of course. Public financing is an interesting idea. The devil's in the details of that, as in any case. Many of the Republicans who are running for this seat, now that Lou Barletta is gone for the Senate, if you look at their campaign finance filings, they're getting $5,400 a piece from a handful of people, and that's the maximum. I don't want $5,400 from any of you. I want $27 from 200 of you, because that's an investment. You're going to show up and vote. They're going to get one vote for $5,400. One practical vote. Money is not inconsequential. We need money. We welcome your donations, because I've got to drive up and down the district, and we've got to get venues like this, et cetera. But we're taking a much different approach to this campaign than people in the modern world are taking these days. We're not going to sit back and fire emails and robocalls and television commercials and shiny postcards at people. We're going to be here with you, talking to you, listening to you. You're going to tell your friends, your families, your neighbors, your coworkers about the experience, and that's how we're going to get over the threshold here. We're doing that as a kind of hopeful leadership by example. I was upstairs. I live in a tiny little row house in the working class district of Carlisle. I'm upstairs. MSNBC is on in the middle of the day because it's good television. I can't see what's going on, but I can hear, and it's during the primary for the Alabama race, Luther Strange, Roy Moore. They're interviewing an older gentleman. I'm confident that this was an old, white, Southern gentleman from Alabama. Although I couldn't see him, I was pretty sure this is who I'm listening to. And he's complaining about all of the shiny postcards that he gets, because they've got a picture of the candidate's family or their pets, and I've got nice enough pets, but the candidate's name on the front and back, and 3 sentences, and the guy saying, don't they know, or don't they think that we know how to read? Don't they think that we will read? You know, I'd already designed my flyer months before that, because I know that people will read. I know we can do this a different way. And if we show that, then I don't care how much money the Republicans want to throw at this race, we're going to beat them anyway. And I think that will provide an important lesson. We get into this kind of bad science here where everybody's campaigning and doing exactly the same things, and then you end up believing that you can only win if you do those things. That's a false assumption. People aren't trying any other approach. We're trying a different approach, a much more personal, much more human, much more value in the voters than what we're hearing. Let me get Frank, and I'll get over to you, please.
This has some to do with you and some not. Well, this is the grant process. You were at our meeting yesterday. Army Corps of Engineers make a simple come in, inspect our flood protection. this is wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. $900,000, $1 million. We want you to fix it. If we go out for a grant, here's the grant. You have to match 40%, or 50%, 15, whatever.
Yeah.
Our budget's what, $1.4 million?
1.4 million.
Now, what I'm trying to find out is a way for either like the cops fast grant or police. Is there a way the federal government can get involved, even on grants that they're not, to streamline this and maybe ease the burden up on the counties? And after you give me an answer on that, I do appreciate what you're saying, because I advise, as I told you, I've been on council 22 years.
Yeah.
Mr. Borough usually comes to Plymouth when there's a disaster. He has his picture taken and he's gone.
Yeah.
He was here once for a meeting at the Howe shop.
Yeah.
And I warned some of my colleagues not to go. Because all it is was a photo op he put in saying, look, it's a Democrat town supporting it. And we haven't seen him again.
Yeah.
And listening to you, I don't think that's going to happen.
Let me answer your first question second, if you don't mind, because I was in Bloomsburg. I've been to Bloomsburg many times. I was with Columbia County Indivisible. They were protesting outside of a venue on Main Street in Bloomsburg. Lou Barletta was inside at a Chamber of Commerce event. He didn't go through the front door and through the crowd. He came in the back. He went out the back. It wasn't quite a closed event, but you had to pay $35 or so to get in and participate. It certainly wasn't a public open event. He didn't give anybody pizza when he was there. And I went there really to foot stomp that point that these people on the street here, and their opinions absolutely matter, much more than people who want to spend $35 to sit down with the congressman so he can have his photo opportunity. You know, he does Main Street walks, right? He'll show up in a town like Plymouth, walk up and down the length of the Main Street, stopping in a few businesses to get some photos. He's out of town. You don't know he's been there until it appears in the paper days after that. Yeah. The answer to your first question is, this is simply a matter of choice, right? The federal government absolutely can provide you 100% grants. They can provide you larger grants. They can make the process simple. But we have elected enough Republicans in Congress, and we've had enough Republican presidents that they make this process as hard as it can be. And how do you do that? Simple. You constrain the amount of money that's available, and that makes the competition harder and harder and harder. I was talking with some of the people who were at your meeting yesterday, and it really became clear to me listening to that some communities do a fabulous job accessing those grants, and some communities struggle with it. And that is an indication that it's far too hard to get those grants, far too hard. It's not enough to have, to need to repave the streets here in Plymouth. You've got to have the funding to do that so you can generate demand and attract business. And we've got to make that match for you.
I mean, like our community development grant, that's basically now, we're lucky if we get 2 streets out of that. Years ago, you get maybe 8 or 9.
Right. They used to be more generous, right? And easy to get. And like I said, Donald Trump zeroed community development block grants out in his first budget proposal to Congress. His first budget message put that at 0. That would destroy communities in this country. Absolutely would. Right behind you and then up to you. Yes, ma'am.
I have 2 questions that I believe they're related. What is the reasoning behind the inheritance tax? If someone has already paid taxes while they were amassing the wealth that they're going to leave for their children, why do those children have to pay taxes again?
It's income for those children. And as we discussed here, people who are working, like you're working right now, you're also paying taxes on that income. And to just give, as pointed out here, we have to fund the government. We have to find sources to fund the government. An inheritance tax, and let's be clear, the inheritance tax right now is for a single person was $5.5 million. You have to, so every dollar below $5.5 million is completely free of taxation, unless it's a couple, right? And then I think it's 11 million. So this is not a tax that affects a lot of people. It does provide useful funding for the government. And again, I worked hard. I have money I want to hand over to my grandkids, but I recognize it's going to them as income. And so I'm okay with that tax because, again, we have to fund the government.
And sometimes when I talk to people who have some money, they do agree with most of the values of the
Right.
Democratic Party. But sometimes they feel that the Democratic Party is against wealth. How do we reconcile that?
Well,
Excuse me, could you repeat the question?
yeah, there's a perception among wealthy people that the Democratic Party is against wealth. And there are a lot of wealthy Democrats, for starters, and so they've made that choice. We're not against wealth. We're not against capitalism. We're not against free market, free enterprise system. We just understand that what that does is it channels money from the poorest people up to the wealthiest. We have to have a mechanism to have sustained economic growth that pulls money out of the top and plugs it back into the bottom, because wages alone are not enough. And we did that for most of the 20th century. For a long period in the 20th century, we had money flowing up to wealthy people and then flowing back down using our government, because that's the only means we have for doing this, back down to the bottom. That created an economic cycle that made us the strongest nation in the world. Since 1980, Republicans have been strangling that. They've been cutting taxes and cutting taxes and cutting taxes so they can cut the flow that goes into the bottom of this cycle. And we have not experienced the economic growth that we were accustomed to experiencing since they've launched on this project. It hurts local communities, it hurts the nation, it hurts workers, it hurts taxpayers, it hurts everybody. Absolutely everybody. Sir.
Yeah, one of my gravest concerns about what's going on in the country today is the resurgence of the politics of hatred, the politics of racism, the politics of misogyny and xenophobia and just hatred of people who aren't like we are. And it's such a resurgence. And I know myself as a young person in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, at the Army War College, I led demonstrations against racism. I mean, I was there and I fought it. And it breaks my heart to see that the gains that were made, I guess it was a false perception that I had. The gains that we had seemed to be trickling into the past. What's your perception on that? What do you have to say about that?
You know, we never got rid of prejudice and discrimination on a personal level. We can get rid of it at an institutional level, because that's easy to see and monitor. But what we've done at the personal level is we've kind of shamed them under a rock. And they got a new champion in 2015. Donald Trump started with racism. He continues with racism. He's emboldened people all along the line. You know, Donald Trump was recently in an insult match with the leader of North Korea. Why this happens, we don't know, but there he is. One, he's not a white guy. He's not Vladimir Putin, for example. So they're going insults back and forth, leading us closer and closer to World War III. And then Donald lost interest in that because he got distracted by kneeling black NFL players and distracted by a black pregnant widow of a Green Beret. And that took him off target. And then a black congresswoman got involved, et cetera, and then he was gone. You didn't hear him say anything about North Korea for weeks. That simply, we know it encourages people, right? Spencer talks about it. David Duke just came out and applauded the president for sharing some bigoted anti-Muslim videos. I mean, this is routine. These folks are scared. They're not brave. When they have a leader that waves the flag and says, we can do this now, then they're going to slither out of their rocks, and we're going to hear this. And it's going to continue until we shame them back underneath there again. Who do we start with? We start with the president. Had a question in the back? Or go in here. Yes, sir.
Well, you mentioned that Democrats don't come up with plans. We need something. So I'm going to ask you, just a broad outline.
Okay.
Where do you see healthcare?
Excellent. Thank you for that. And this is going to be brief, so I want to direct you to the website so you can read a longer explanation of this. This is a huge part of the U.S. economy, right? It's 16% of the U.S. economy. And so the one thing you don't do with that much of the economy is jerk it hard to the left or hard to the right, because you're going to end up with economic problems, unintended consequences, and even anticipated consequences. So, of course, what the let me back up just a little bit. Between 2014 and 2016, the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act created 240,000 jobs. It created 240,000 jobs by adding a healthcare demand for 20 million people that didn't exist before. The Republicans were going to get rid of that healthcare demand. They were going to separate those people from healthcare access. That demand was going to disappear. Those jobs were going to be lost. So that absolutely must not happen. Healthcare, by the way, healthcare and social services in the 11th district employs 48,000 people. It's the #1 employment sector in the 11th district. We cannot lose these jobs. Absolutely cannot lose them. It would be a catastrophe. The proposal, as I understand it, from Bernie Sanders to go to a completely public Medicare for all single-payer system would decrease over a decade U.S. spending on healthcare from $49 trillion to $32 trillion. That sounds at first glance like a wonderful thing. Hey, that's $17 trillion we've saved. It's 8.5% of GDP each of those 10 years. We cannot lose 8.5% of our GDP. We have no mechanism to replace that. You saw the pie chart there. That would equate to like a 12% increase in consumer spending, and I don't know how we would generate a 12% increase in consumer demand. Government spending, you'd have to have a 100% increase in government spending to make up for that. Otherwise, you're just going not just into a recession, but maybe into a depression. That's a huge drop. So I've recommended 4 steps under healthcare with the goal of moving us closer to a public-private system that resembles our education system. Why that for the example? Well, I read a few years ago about the system in France, which was then rated the #1 system in the world. And when you read the description of France's healthcare system, the first thing that pops in your mind is, hey, that's how we provide education here in the United States. We give everyone access to education. If you're unhappy with what's on the public platter and you have the resources available to you, then you can go into a private system and get something better. There's also an advantage of keeping a private system in healthcare is because there will be more money there, and so there will be more research and there will be more advancements that may not happen in the public system as well. So the 4 steps. #1, provide a public option in all of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act exchanges, all of them. Okay? That ends the Republican argument of, hey, there's only one option here, which is still better than 0, or in a county here or there are 0, although all those gaps were immediately closed after that issue was raised. But if you've got a public option at all of those exchanges, that also helps hold down the premiums on the private options. And the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services could generate something like this simply and quickly because that's what they do. They provide a public option. Second thing is for 3 years, over the course of 3 years, lower the Medicare age. So lower it to 64 one year, 63 the next, 62 the second to move more people onto Medicare, and halt at that point and see what the effects are. The economic effects, the healthcare effects, see how this is working for us. Increase the poverty threshold for Medicaid over the same 3-year period. We're at 138% of poverty now. We can move that up to 150% over the course of 3 years. Stop, see what's happening there. The 4th thing is fully resource the Veteran Affairs healthcare system. Fully resource it. So we don't have people waiting in line. We're not suffering from reports of people. Suicide among military members, former military members, for example, is way too high. Homelessness is too high. And the Republicans made a point of telling us over and over again that people were dying because they couldn't get into a VA healthcare facility. So fund that fully. Stop when you've got that fully funded and start considering whether we need to expand that to cover first responders, firemen, police officers, et cetera, because the local community folks will tell you that they're struggling with healthcare issues for people like that, and that would take a big burden off of local governments that they could then take those resources and spend that on other things like matching grants perhaps, et cetera. So those 4 things will move us closer towards a public option for all because we're doing 4 of them and we're not rushing to one solution. We can evaluate the consequences of those and decide where to push forward from there. But ultimately the goal again is public access to health care for everyone with a private system for those who insist on it. Maybe that was longer than what's on the website. Yes, ma'am.
So I also work at Wilkes University, and we were actually just talking a little bit before about things like younger folks and engagement with things like politics. And I also know, I don't know exactly, but in Pennsylvania we skew older. And I imagine that at your town hall so far you've seen a lot more folks, middle-aged and older folks.
My age and up, yeah. I skew older every year. Yeah.
Just 1 year though.
I'm wondering what the role of the youth vote is in the 11th district, and if it is, useful. I mean, I think it's important, obviously, to reach out to all demographics in the constituency. But what's the role of the youth vote here? How do we reach out to younger voters and get them engaged in this district in particular?
Andy doesn't know he has that challenge yet, but the campaign committee in the southern area and the associated committee, as you can see, as you've experienced firsthand, are millennials in both cases. And John will tell you, I've challenged the committee down there, and Andy will get this challenge as well, to get that millennial vote out. I will assist as best I can, but you're in that demographic, and I want you to work on it. While I'm going to work on what I call the newspaper demographic, people of Democratic and Republican and independent leanings that will actually read a newspaper and actually welcome facts, even if they disagree with the facts that they're hearing. I've been to Dickinson College. I'm hoping to go to every college up and down the length of the district multiple times. I'll be with Shippensburg high school students on Friday of this week to talk to them as well. And there are these core populations who do want to get involved and do understand the importance. And every time I'm with them, and apologies to everybody my age and older, but every time I'm with those folks, I tell them, if you think your parents and your grandparents' age cohorts are going to turn over to you a nice, clean, survivable planet, get that idea out of your mind right now. It's on you. If you want a future, you've got to fight for it, period. If you just turn your back on this, I can't promise you what you're going to get, but it's not going to be good. So, and they can see that, right? This is the age cohort that is perhaps most offended by some of the things that are coming out of Donald Trump's mouth. And that's, they're essential for driving that back. Absolutely essential. Will they respond to it? The most active person in Shippensburg High School found 40 students at Shippensburg High School who were eligible to register to vote. He went to all 40, pressed them to register. 3 of the 40 signed up. That's 7.5%. That's not going to do it. So, but it's the first attempt. This is an iterative process. You have to keep trying, keep trying, keep trying, keep pushing at it. I've exhausted you? That's good. We still have soda and we still have pizza. I believe we can have more. Gavin, yes, please.
I was wondering what your opinions are on net neutrality.
I think we're going to suffer severe consequences here because I'm pretty sure the FCC is going to revoke that, and we're going to be in trouble. I don't see what's going to stop them. I really don't. That can be reversed. It will be difficult, but it can be reversed. And I think when people come to grips with what happens with net neutrality when it's rolled back and they have to start paying to get access that they took for granted before, then maybe we'll see something come of that. But yeah, I'm not very hopeful. And the Congress is not stopping the administration on any issue. If anything, they're encouraging them. So that's where people in your age cohort need to go talk to folks and say, hey, maybe it's not important to you because you're 85 years old and you never get online, but for me it's essential. This is where my education comes from, and you need to stop interfering with it. Are we done? Let me make just one pitch to you. As I said before, I don't need $5,400 from you, but events like this do cost a little bit of money, and we want to do dozens and dozens and dozens of these. We're going to run up the score on Lou Barletta and any other Republican who gets in here. People like you in communities all across the 11th District need this opportunity. I need this opportunity. I really appreciate either you going to the website, which is howeforpa11.org, HOWEFORPA11.org. Click the donate button, send a check to Howe for PA11, and I can give you the address. Or go talk to John Boscia over there, and he will swipe a card and take your donation tonight. This is your country, your government, your district, your community. Make it respond to you. All right. Thank you.